The glory of the gospel is that if there's any sin, Jesus has paid for it. So there's a sense where you're uncertain. There are many times where we're praying, pouring our heart out to the Lord. And if we've done something wrong, forgive me, dealing with that. Because should I have gone on sabbatical? Should I have stayed at home to be near my mom? We've been able to call her some, so that's a help. So there's just always guilt. Like, should I go visit her more often? Should I do this? Should I do that? I do remember something that Tim Keller said years ago, talking about having a very large church. He said, when you have a very large church and you can't personally minister to everybody, you better have a good grasp on the gospel, because you're always going to feel guilt. But you can't ever do as much as you want to do.
All right, welcome, Dan and Linda Jarms. Thank you for joining us on the Tube podcast. Here we are again. Well, I thought it would be helpful for us to think carefully about dementia. Dan, maybe you can tell a little of your own story, your own experience, first of all. Let's start there. What's your experience been of dementia?
Not personal yet, but we sort of all expect it at some point.
At some point, yes. In the genes.
Yeah, I mean, it's humorous, but not humorous. My mom, we noticed things were going on half a dozen years after my father passed away. And, her memory wasn't good. Eventually, I would go to her doctor's appointments with her, and they would give a memory test. It's like, and they score the end of the memory test, and it starts to grade the initial grades of dementia. And they start with, remember these 3 words. And they list out the 3 words. And then he talks about something else. And the doctor asks, now what were the 3 words? And I'm sitting there going, I don't remember the 3 words. And I'm normal. So, I think there's that reality. But my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. And we saw it years before. So things were coming. And, lots of people my age would say, when I get to a certain point that I can't take care of myself, I'll make it really easy on you, and I'll go to the doctor and I'll get help, and I'll, get into a home. And then when they actually get there, they've lied the whole time. They've lied the whole time, because a person with dementia doesn't feel like they have dementia. They feel like they're just going through their day. They're fine. And they think that the reason why they forgot something is because somebody misplaced it, or it's somebody else's fault, or so there are realities with that just end up with it's a certain kind of conflict. And I maybe want Linda to share too. I asked if Linda would join me because spouses do it together.
Yeah.
Her dad eventually at 89 was diagnosed with dementia, but he had a good care regimen. Her brother handled quite a bit of that, and he was a sweet-spirited man, so he wasn't really hard to deal with. There were awkward things, but so mom was diagnosed with technically Alzheimer's, and that's just another form of dementia. So dementias come with all kinds of names. Alzheimer's is one name of dementia. It's not a worse kind of dementia, it's just another one. And there are good medications now that slow a lot of things down. But I was the sibling that was already doing most of her care. So I walked through the process of getting a diagnosis, of getting health professionals involved. I walked through the process of getting a social services person who could help us figure out what we need to do. And then when official diagnosis happened, all my siblings, there was all of a sudden a meeting of the minds, like, oh, what are we going to do now with that? So I feel like I've carried most of the practical burden of that. And then there's also the financial, because a person can't take care of themselves very well. They don't know they can't take care of themselves, but they can't take care of themselves. So my mom, who, years before would have said, well, I never want to be a problem. I never want to be a burden. All of a sudden, she can't reason well anymore. So she can't make good decisions for herself. And eventually I transition from being son to almost parent again. And this is normal. Every person in the world is going to have to go through this with their parents, where their parents' weakening state almost puts them in the they need to be cared for stage. So I just felt increasingly like her parent. And my mom came to the Lord pretty late in life, 67. And she made some progress, but people with dementia lose certain abilities. So lose filters, they go backward in behavior sometimes. Things happen. So that's a challenge. And I remember the first time I read Bruised Reed by Richard Sibbes, he talked about the fact that you rarely get old and degrade in a better spiritual place. Like you probably don't end as well as you were when you were 60 or whatever, you're younger, because your body's deteriorating. And the instrument, Brian used a good phrase, when your instrument starts working really well, it's hard to make good spiritual decisions. So those are, I think, some of the realities that we had to deal with. So I was closest to her, and I eventually became and am kind of if she feels bad, I'm the person she's going to tell. So if things are going great, she's going to tell somebody else. If things are going bad, she's going to tell me. And that's not all she does. So I don't want to put it in that bad of a light, but I feel like a 3-year-old falls down, hits his knee, and he runs to mommy. I just hit my knee. Wouldn't cry to anybody until sees mommy. And all of a sudden, I see mommy, and all the emotions come out. So that's kind of the role I get at this stage of the game. And so there are a whole bunch of things the Lord's got to teach us. So there's a lot to say in that. Why don't you fill in your perspective on that?
Yeah, you've done a good job kind of summarizing where we're at right now. Yeah, it has been a sanctifying process for us as a couple, and in a marriage. I think I'm the daughter-in-law, and
And my mom's hero.
No,
it's really true. If anybody is going to, save the day for my mom's going to look at me and say, I'm in a terrible place. Can't you fix it? And Linda's going to be able to actually talk sense. And so she's just a great compliment for that.
But maybe I just found out I was doing this podcast like 15 minutes ago. So bear with me if I'm kind of finding my words. But I just don't think we were prepared. We weren't prepared for what was going to hit us when it came to caring for aging parents and caring for a parent with Alzheimer's, and the guilt that you feel, and the load that you feel, the grief that you feel. And so I'm just so thankful that this podcast is happening today, that maybe we can help others prepare spiritually for it's a lot of the cycle of life that people go through, having aging parents with a lamentable state of losing their filter and seeing them deteriorate. We're thankful that Dan's mom we believe she's saved. So that's such a blessing. That makes a big difference, and just the ultimate hope that we have for her. But there's a lot that we weren't prepared for, even spiritually, that God has taught us along the way. And I guess maybe the biggest thing is learning to be patient with them losing their filter. And Dan kind of he's a little bit of the punching bag. and
being an innate people pleaser.
Yeah.
I take that to heart, so it's like,
Yeah, learning to be patient with the patience that Christ has with us. And I haven't always done a good job at being patient and with my dear mother-in-law is not always pleasant. So it's sanctifying in that it causes us to lean into the gospel and remember how patient God is with us. And compared to God, we all are little toddlers or mentally disabled, and He's very patient with us. So I see God's good hand in all of it, and learning compassion for her. We think it's hard on us. Think about how hard it must be for our dear aging parents who feel like their world is spinning out of control. So leaning into the compassion of Christ for us and learning to have compassion for her is what we're trying to grow in. But we have a long way to go.
Yeah. There's several things, to say about just as far as the story side, and you should share some of your story too, because in some ways you've crossed the finish line for your parents with this, and now you're going to be dealing with that. We're still in the race. But a long time ago, when I chose to come back to Washington State, one of the reasons why is I knew way out ahead that I was going to be the most likely person to give more selfless service to my parents. I was the only believer, and I thought I should probably be around. So it made the decision to come back to Spokane after seminary. I had other opportunities, not because I was great, I just had different opportunities. But that was one of the factors that was really important. And that really comes from that 1 Timothy 5 passage where it says, honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. So, there's a principle that Paul's telling Timothy to train the church, that at some point, all of our parents are going to age out. They're going to have limited skills, and they're not going to be able to live on their own. That's really what this means. They need to honor them, meaning be ready with money and resources to take care of your aging parents. We have a retirement system that they didn't have. We have a state pension, or you have a pension. My parents had retirement. Money's not really been our question, but you need to be ready to be there. So I knew that was coming. So I always knew that was my duty. But I think on my story, as I process it, my dad was deteriorating, but he just died of leukemia. It was supposed to be slow and degrading, but it went from slow, diminish. A year before, he was helping me with house projects around the house, and a year later, he was just gone. He was dead. Mom's has been slow, and so in that, you don't have this big change. It's just this slow descent with all kinds of indecision. Is she not okay? Can she still live in her house? Can she drive? So for me, the process had to go from, I'll help you write your bills. I'll help you take care of your finances. I'll make sure all of your investments are, I just had increasing the responsibilities. And then eventually I had to be the bad guy to say, you can't drive anymore. And take away the car keys. And so, which nobody wants to give up. In the States, that's really important. Everybody's got a car, and that's a symbol of your freedom. So to take away somebody's driving privileges is always a big thing in the States. So, but all those were, I have to love her regardless of how she feels about me. She's not happy with me, but I need to love her. So I need to do what's best for her regardless of what she feels like I'm doing to her. And the grace of God in it, the easier part in it, is deep down she knows she doesn't really trust anybody more than she trusts me. So even though she complains to me, she still trusts me. And then I have had the ability to say, let's remember the Lord's here. You don't need to be angry. Let's pray. And I'll recite some verses. And she can recenter. That is a gift. So that part of it's there. So that was one side of it. Then there was another side, is that Mom's part of the church too. And my mom could hold it together at church, she's a joker. She's fun. She kids with people. She can turn the charm on. And I'm having to make hard decisions. And at church, everybody's like, well, what's wrong with your mom? Well, yeah, you have the same conversation with her every week and you think it's funny, but I actually have to. So then we had the challenge at church. Am I doing the right thing for my mom? And I have people questioning me that I'm not doing the right thing. And my siblings are also weighing in, and they have the whole picture. Not everybody agrees with what to do for mom. Not everybody agrees how fast to move. And not everybody agrees what's going on. And so that was, I think, a particularly burdening thing is we had to make decisions for my mom that people in church thought we were doing something really bad to my mom. And so I wasn't expecting that. And eventually I had to go to the elders and say, what should I do? And they said, it's okay if you stop bringing her to church. We need to figure out other ways for her to get spiritual stuff in her life. But she was just losing the ability to feel. She would just say things to people about me in church to her friends. So that was a weird, awkward season. And my poor wife was like, my husband's like being the best he possibly can to you, and you're treating my husband like this. So she gets the wife thing going, and praise God, she gets the wife thing going.
The wife thing.
Yeah. She's like, so
Protective wife.
Yes.
she's just and she's very sweet. So my wife would never be like sinful in doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, not compared to me. So that's part of our story. So you're in a community and that's happening in dementia. The seniors who know my mom really well were really gracious. They knew what she really needed. So it was okay. But anyway, that's part of our story of going through it.
Picking up from what you were saying, I think I get the impression that your mum, I saw you with her and I saw you dealing with her a couple of years ago when I visited, and a lot of painful similarities from some of the stuff I've gone through. But I get the impression your mum still knows you, she's still able to interact with you, and you're still able to reason with her to some degree.
Right. Yeah, that's still the case. Our church has multiple generations. So I've been watching my friends who are 10 years older have already passed through this phase. Mm-hmm. So they were a huge resource for us. They knew where to send us for elder care help. They knew, like I had resources. I wasn't really alone. At a church maybe like GraceLife London, you're the first person going through this. And you don't have necessarily the surrounding resources.
Maybe not the first, but I think first in my own experience, it's interesting, just trying to compare your experiences to mine. I guess our story started back in 2019, November of 2019. We knew my mum was getting forgetful. She was getting very forgetful, and we started to realize, she's declining. But then she just began to get hallucinations, visual hallucinations, which made her unrestrainable. She would see children and she would go off into the night without adequate clothing in the November British winter. And she would just be saying, no, there's children walking off. I've got to go and get them. And no one could keep her in. So she ended up actually very suddenly going from the state where we realized she's declining, she's getting more forgetful, to she's in hospital and she's care of the National Health Service. So she was now their charge because they wouldn't let her home. My dad was desperate to have her home. But the National Health Service could see the degree to which she had dementia. To some degree, we as a family didn't want to acknowledge it. Well, at least some of us didn't want to acknowledge it. My dad was desperate to deny it. that it really was as bad as the National Health Service was saying that it was. The doctors were saying this is bad, she needs care, and they wouldn't release her home. So there was a period of real struggle. Then that, of course, turned immediately into a terrible isolation during COVID, where she was in a care home some distance away without the ability for us even to visit her for quite a period. That accelerated her decline. It was a strange season. One of the strangest things with that for us was then having my dad get dementia during the same period, but just behind my mum. So we started off with quite a sudden introduction into the world of dementia with my mum. She had mixed dementia, so it's not Alzheimer's. The dementia has many forms, as you know. Dementia is the umbrella diagnosis, you would say. So Alzheimer's is one cause, and there are various causes: vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia. If you've got go down the Parkinson's route, and my dad had Parkinson's, but not Lewy body dementia. His dementia was also mixed, like my mum's. So just various physiological processes taking place in the brain, causing damage progressively. But what was stark then with my mum and sudden with my mum was very gradual, and we didn't really know it was happening to start with my dad. I guess because you never expect the same thing happen to lightning to strike twice in the same place. So we did not expect it with my dad. We were suddenly realizing, hang on a minute, he's leaving the gas on, and we had a gas hob, and he'd leave that on and come into. My sister would turn up to find it, the gas ring still burning, and one time the house full of gas where it had been turned on but not lit. And he would leave the doors open, and you would say some serious, some not so serious, some humorous, some tragic instances of the decline in memory. With my mum, thankfully, with my dad, thankfully, we had just arranged for what we call power of attorney. I don't know what you call it in the States.
That's what we call it too.
So we just arranged that legal power, which allowed us to then supervise his care. With my mum, she declined so rapidly that we hadn't got anything in place, and that made life very, very awkward, because my dad even wasn't allowed to have more than an outside voice in the decisions about her care. So significant a thing. I would say, for people watching this podcast and thinking through these issues, if you don't have lasting power of attorney established with your parents, get it set up, both for financial matters, so important, and for health decisions, because it becomes so painful when you can't make those decisions as a family. But for my parents, so my mum diagnosed in 2019. She passed away in June of this year, 2024. My dad was a couple of years behind her in diagnosis. I can't remember exactly now, but he passed away in April this year. More suddenly, he was always behind her. My mum ended up quite advanced in dementia, so the last 6 months or so, she was not communicative at all, unable to have any kind of verbal interaction. Before that, for 6 months or so prior to that, we could go in and, as we always did, sing hymns and talk about the Lord with her, and she might say, "Oh, Jesus, precious Jesus," but the rest of it was all incoherent nonsense. Prior to that, she would just look at us for the last couple of years. I'd say she didn't know who we were. Before that, I would go and I'd say, "I'm your son, Tom," and she'd look at me as if I'd just stepped off the moon. You know, "Are you? How old are you?" Very, very shocked. You know, I'd say, "Well, Mum, you're, you know, back in those days, you're 84," and she died at 88. But I'd say, "You're 84," and you know, am I? Wow, you know, and she would accept in the end that I was her son. Strange, because in their case, they ended up being cared for in the same room for a couple of years. They were together, which was really quite something. And my mum seemed to be comforted by the sound of my dad's voice, but she didn't recognize him. She seemed to settle a little bit, having the familiarity of his voice there, I think. But even that towards the end became problematic. And it's a degrading, it's a humiliating, just incredibly painful downhill process, isn't it? I mean, I think that's one of the. It'd be good for us to talk about what's been most difficult for us to deal with spiritually and personally. But I think that the whole experience for me has been one which has just been an unending, and now it has ended. But the whole downhill spiral of decline has been an unceasing source of pain in the family. I know for my sister as well, for everyone else involved, my daughter, my wife, just watching them suffer has been painful. So there's on the one side, you could say, there's just nothing good about it. It is just horrible. But then there have been redeeming moments and blessings that have come through it. And I think that would be good for us to talk about. So maybe just to kind of give some direction to this discussion, we've talked a little bit about how it's impacted you and your family. Maybe you've touched on how it impacted you in your role as a pastor in the church. Now, I don't know that we've discussed just the impact in terms of time and just the effect on your life as a pastor and as a husband and as a father. How did that affect you, having a mother suddenly who needed so much more care and so much more input from you? You've got children and grandchildren, you've got a church that you're pastoring, you've got a wife that still needs a husband. How did that impact you? And how, I guess coming out of that, how did you deal with it? How did you respond to that pressure?
I think when she was still living in her home, I look back and I don't know how Dan did it, because he had all the pressures and joys of the ministry. Excuse me. And his mom lived about a half hour away from us, and she had an acre of
10 acres.
10 acres of mowable lawn that she expected Dan to mow.
Keep up the irrigation system.
Oh yeah, the spring. I don't know if it makes sense here, but taking care
10
of
acres of mowable lawn does not make sense.
it was
In London.
I don't want to overstate it. It's 5. It's 5.
yeah, she had like a small park that was all mowed, and she expected him to
Just keep
care
it up.
for it, and then to the bills. So there was a time it was quite stressful on our family and a little bit on our marriage, where he was trying to honor his mom and go out and care for her and care for his family and the church. So those were trying times as far as the stress on our schedule, for sure. I look back and God is so faithful, because here we are on the other side of it. We got through it. But time-wise, it's better now, because she's in a home, and she actually is like 4 minutes away from us by car. And
that wasn't even always true. Yeah.
that wasn't always true. Yeah. And so we can see her regularly now. And so that part is a blessing that way. But yeah, there definitely were times when it was.
Yeah. The time ramped way up as far as what she needed,
Yeah.
and then what I was available for. So yeah, there were time pressures that we had to figure out how to balance. And I think sometimes you're praying and you just take what's next. This is what's next, and Lord, please help me. This is what's next, and then you just try to keep the plate spinning, and in dependence on the Lord. Here's the things that are going, but can we keep the plate spinning? So I think there was quite a season. That was probably a 3-year season, 4-year season of keeping the plate spinning for her, getting out, paying her bills, making sure the house was taken care of. She had this really bad windstorm accident, which trees fell on the roof of her house, and so then there's dealing with construction people and it's in the middle. One of the things about dementia and Alzheimer's, since it happens gradually, you never know how bad is she. What can she do and what can she not do? What's she responsible for? What's she not responsible for? What should I step in on and what should I not step in on? So, that's still the case today. So you feel like, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
There's always this feeling like we're not doing the right thing and we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're close to somebody, it's harder to see it. Like I think once in a while I've had a harder time seeing. I've had moments of, have we done the right thing? And for Dan, I'll second guess because I'll just feel bad that she's in this place. Have we done the right thing? And he'll have to remind me, yes, honey, remember? And he'll tell me about the doctor visits and the diagnosis because her degradation has been very gradual. And there's sometimes where I'm like, wow, she just played that game of cards and she beat me. You know what I mean?
I play cribbage with her, and she if I help her keep track of her points, she beats me.
Yeah.
So that's no fun.
For us,
to lose or to win.
So these moments of second guessing yourself, which you have to again go back to the Lord and trust my husband, but that's been our unique experience at times.
Yeah, I think so. That you just always wish you could do more, and you always wish you knew just what you were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And so it's that. Have I really loved her well enough?
Yeah.
Have I really done that? That's probably the hardest part.
I think it'd be really helpful to talk about guilt.
Yeah. I think the glory of the gospel is that if there's any sin, Jesus has paid for it. So there's a sense where you're uncertain. There are many times where we're praying, pouring our heart out to the Lord. And if we've done something wrong, forgive me, dealing with that. Because should I have gone on sabbatical? Should I have stayed at home to be near my mom? We've been able to call her some, so that's a help. So there's just always guilt of like, should I go visit her more often? Should I do this? Should I do that? I do remember something that Tim Keller said years ago, talking about having a very large church. He said, when you have a very large church and you can't personally minister to everybody, you better have a good grasp on the gospel, because you're always going to feel guilt that you can't ever do as much as you want to do. And we've really found that true, that Kelly Deans said something to Linda about this. If in treating your parents you weren't as caring or as available, or you made a bad decision, if it's sin, there's a solution for that. That's the glory of the gospel. And then when you don't know, there's also a solution for that. So it's made us regroup around the gospel very often, dealing with that.
Even to add to that a little bit, when my dad died, my parents were about 3 hours away by car, and I don't really prefer driving by myself. And my mom was alone, and Dan, being in the ministry, couldn't take me there very often.
I don't have weekends off.
Yeah, and And then she passed away suddenly after my dad. And she didn't have dementia, but she was alone and she was the sweetest, most godliest woman. And then all of a sudden she was gone. And I had a lot of guilt, like, oh, why didn't I just get in the car and drive by myself, even though I don't prefer driving by myself? And I felt really bad that I didn't spend more time with her in her last few years. And she's such a sweet, godly woman. And I was confessing that to Kelly Dean, who you got, Mike's mom. And that's the story. And she said, well, did you sin? And I said, I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't trust the Lord, and maybe I didn't get in the car and do it, even though I was afraid. And then she says, well, you can confess your sin. And guess what? You have a merciful Savior. So I did find freedom in saying, Lord, forgive me. I should have spent more time with my mom. And then Dan has helped me say, guess what? Your mom's in glory and she's fine now.
Your mom could care less.
She could care less.
She's happy in the Lord.
Which translated into English is couldn't care less.
She couldn't
One of
care
those
less.
bizarre Americanisms. She could care less. She couldn't
care less. There you go.
There we go.
So I don't know if that helps at all, but just our weaknesses and our failings, and then it keeps coming back to our sweet Savior and caring for aging parents and our failures and guilt. But now regularly with Dan's mom, I'll say, Lord, are we pleasing you with how we're caring for this sweet little, sometimes difficult lady?
Fireball.
She's the complete opposite of my mom. My mom was sweet and kind. I never heard her say a bad word about anybody. Love the Lord. Dan's mom. It's his stepmom, actually. It's not his biological mom, but yeah,
Which is another saga.
It's a whole other saga. Yeah, but she's very fiery and has quite a tongue on her. And, so I don't know where I'm going with that, but I often ask the Lord, am I pleasing you? What does it look like to please you? And we are not doing, we're not always doing the best job. We're in process trying to figure it out.
So I think that's helpful, dealing with the guilt where you feel like I may have sinned, confessing it as a sin, perhaps to the Lord, and seeking forgiveness. I think one of the great struggles with dementia is the unknown. Am I doing the right thing? Should I be doing something different? I think when it comes to the question about care, do I give care do I give this care myself, or is this something that I can or cannot realistically do? I mean, I think one of the things we've agonized over as a married couple, Donna and I, again and again and again, was how could we care for them? We've so many times just wanted to scoop them up and take them home and look after them. During that whole process, my dad desperately wanted to be with my mum. But with his dementia, he would get round to then. There was no doubt that his overall request and the decision made early on was for him to be located with her. That was the number one request on his list, was he wanted to be with her. So that was arranged. The only way to arrange that was for him to go into the same care home as she was in, and praise God, that was granted as an answer to prayer, and with great surprise amongst and everyone in the care industry that they ended up in the same room. We were told it was impossible. Praise God, it happened. But that didn't stop my dad with his dementia spending 40 minutes, sometimes an hour, whenever I would visit, berating me, admonishing me, scolding me for not taking him home and looking after him.
To his house.
To his house or to our house, but out of there. His dementia wasn't as bad as hers, but both of them went through a very agitated, very aggressive stage where their confusion was moderate, and yet the dementia had this effect on their personalities where they they would turn on us, and turn on us in a way which was very difficult to handle. I mean, for me personally, having my dad scold me for 40 minutes to an hour left me completely wrecked. But part of it is just not knowing how to respond. I mean, especially when he would invoke the Lord's name, and not in vain, but he meant it sincerely. He'd say, God wouldn't want you to be leaving me here like this. That was like a knife to the heart, because I didn't want to leave him there like that either. But it's that scenario where you're stuck saying, I don't know what else we can be doing. And I think we had to deal with a lot of guilt at that point, just coming before the Lord and saying, is there anything that we could be doing, trying to open ourselves up to, well, what would the Lord really want us to be doing? Each time, thankfully, we would come back from that foray into the world of possibilities to the point where we could say, okay, we're comfortable with the fact that this is the best possible thing that we can be doing to honor our parents and to provide for them, as you say, to make some return to them in this part of their life. You want to be doing everything that you can possibly do to give them the best that you can possibly give them. I think that was one of the most difficult things for us, was just the experiencing that reprimand and not knowing how to do a better job.
Yeah, and I think anybody who's dealt with memory issues with people with dementias is that then that's repeated over and over.
Oh, it's every time.
So it's the same thing every time. We've talked about this. I can say it kind of comically, because the Lord granted us a little relief through some give it back humor. So I picked my mom up for lunch after church, and we're going to spend a couple hours with her and play cribbage. We'll have her over to our house. And she went on the same, I know a lot of kids, when their parents get old, they move them into their house. Like I've heard that 100 times. Mm-hmm. And I'm driving along, and we're not very far from my house. And she said that, and I said to her, well, I know a lot of mothers that are really joyful to live with. And she said, ooh. I said, you can't give it out unless you can take it. And that was the kind of thing that my mom's okay with.
Sure.
So, but that was just...
My mom was a headmistress. I wouldn't have got away.
I know. But it was... Yeah, those are challenging.
But one question I would have is, how did you deal with the question of truthfulness? Because one of the issues that comes up again and again with dealing with people with dementia is just they cannot necessarily process the problem of their surroundings. Very often carers deal with that by just going along with their delusions. Both my dad and my mum had quite serious delusions. At one point, early in my mum's dementia, she was convinced that the bombs were dropping when she went through the Blitz here in London. She was evacuated from London as a child, and so it was a very real thing in the background of her experience, but she thought the place was being bombed. We'd phone her up. She'd say, you've got to call the police. Something, someone's... we're being invaded. It's terrible. People are dying. And, that's a fairly easy delusion to deal with. Some of my dad's delusions later on were much harder to deal with. The carers have been attacking me. The carers have been attacking your mother. Incidents were invented and exaggerated. And okay, those kind of delusions are one problem. Delusions of another kind of delusion my dad would have regularly was just the solutions to different problems that he would see. He'd come up with some crazy invention. He was going to get himself out of there, and they'd have a house. Delusions about having a house somewhere. He was convinced that he had so many houses, there must be one somewhere that was still his, and then he'd fixate on it, and then he'd be saying, "I'm going home. I just need to get the keys from so and so." And carers would sometimes go along with those delusions and just join in the game. How did you deal with the question of truthfulness to decide, do I play this game, or do I correct, or do I just divert? What did you do?
I mean, that's still ongoing, so we're still living with that. My mom is going to get on an airplane and go to Chicago to see my cousins and live with them for a while. Almost every week, she's going to take a trip. She's going to buy a house. She's going to do something.
She's part owner of the...
Part owner, yeah. She is also part owner of the care facility.
Oh, now that's strange, because my dad had the same delusion about the care home. It was actually their home.
Yes, yeah, right.
We just nod. So we don't affirm it, but we don't fight it. We nod and we divert.
Yeah, nod, redirect.
Yeah, redirect. Noticed with her, if she kind of gets in a little bit of a mean mood, especially towards him, if I can bring in humor really helps, or some kind of fun distant memory, music, a joke. I'm able to change her mood pretty quickly.
It's almost instant. If for a while she lived a half hour away from us, for us across town, and so the drive home could be dreadful.
Yeah.
Like how she's going to be. And I'd get in the car and I'd say, "What's your favorite musical?" So we're gonna do Hello Dolly, and I would just turn on Hello. As soon as she started to complain, I'd just turn it up, and you know what? A lot of times, all of a sudden, she'd just be singing and whatever it was, and I'm not sure that's dishonest. So I could correct it in the moment. I say, and the first and foremost thing to always say is, "You can trust the Lord. He loves you. He's going to care. I know He loves me." You know, and I'd recite Psalm 23, which you might remember. But that doesn't mean that 10 minutes later she's not cycled back. And that doesn't mean that the next time I get in the car with her, she's not going back to the same place. So I think we still have to come up with things to do to divert, redirect, and occasionally correct. Like every fourth or fifth time I said, "Mom, you're not taking trips anymore." Like that was a great time of your life when you could take trips to see your nieces and nephews. Have them come and see you now. And you know, that's just what you have, and that's normal. Anybody I know, I've got lots of friends who've already, gone through, graduated, their parents graduated, meaning the parents have gone to be with the Lord, have had to figure out a way to do that. I would say that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a basic commitment to not affirming things that were untrue, and trying whenever possible to orientate my dad more so to the truth of his situation, with mixed success. Very, very mixed success. Sometimes it was very interesting, because sometimes he would accept and he'd say yes, and I talked to him about the fact that he was having these memory issues, and I was saying, "Dad, the reason we're having this conversation and the reason you're agitated is because of your dementia and your memories playing tricks on you. And you're going to have to trust me now." And I really am. There was a stage at which I could have those kind of conversations with him. And sometimes he'd accept it. And sometimes, he's a believer, was a believer. My mum was a believer. And sometimes he would accept it and pull back, and he'd say, you could see he'd go from being agitated about this issue that he'd got as a bee in his bonnet, and then he'd become subdued. But then I'd see him become really depressed, really sad.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, the truth is, it's really painful. You're losing your mind. And there would be moments when he would get insight into that, and it was just devastating for him. And so that's when the pressure of this question about do I share, do I go along with the delusional situation, or do I bother counteracting it with truth? That's where that pressure would come, because I'd say I want to speak the truth into this situation. I want to correct his delusions with orienting him to the truth. But when the truth is so depressing, for instance, that he and Mum are never going to get out of there, that Mum doesn't know who he is, that actually this is it now. But when that truth is so depressing that it sent him into a spiral of depression, from which there was no escape effect, apart from the fact that he'd forget about it when he woke up the next time he'd been to sleep, and it was out of his system, it was gone again. There seemed no point then in that orientation, and so that drove us more towards diversion. We would say, okay, our main aim is to endure. And that's an interesting thing as a Christian, to say, okay, well, my job now is to endure this admonishment for the next hour, and whenever I can, to try to divert him. And I would always, try to seek to divert my dad by saying, Dad, can I read the scriptures to us? Whenever he was even in a little bit in his right mind, he'd say, oh, yes, please. And if I could get to reading the scriptures, and I could get him out of this bee in the bonnet mindset, he would calm right down, and we could have a lovely time. We could have fellowship together, and I would encourage him in the Lord. And I could often read the same scriptures that I read the last time, and the time before, and the time before that. So that's one strange thing is with dementia, is you can give the same encouragement again and again and again, and you find something that works.
Same joke over and over is new every morning.
Same joke. Actually, in one of the books Donna read, Anne Benton wrote a book about caring for elderly parents, and she dealt with, I think, a father-in-law who had dementia, but they made a game of trying to answer the same question differently each time, just for the sake of it. But yeah, same questions again and again and again is its own trying.
I think one of the things that was important for us, is still is important, is the learning the discipline of lament. So the Mark Vrogop book on lament, I've read it with Ross and Lisa. We did a Bible study with that. Remind me what Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy. Being in memory. Do I have? This is a fallen world, and the issue of lament is all over the scripture, in that it's when you see life is not as God designed it, and you ask him, why is it like this? Like, I know who you are, and I know what your promises are, but these don't seem to fit. David would lament. He would cry out for help. He would complain. And then, there's a biblical complaint in that, Lord, why am I going through this? What's going on? When are you going to show up? And so that process of saying about anybody with Alzheimer's, anybody with dementia, anybody just aging with very great difficulties, is that there is a lament. This is not how God designed the world in its original. This is not how the world will end. There is a new heavens and a new earth. But now this is really sad. And I'm just going to tell the Lord, this is really hard. This is really sad. I know you know. I'm going to wait for your answer. Like that's a thing that you need to cultivate, caring for anybody who's ill or difficult, but especially a parent who is dying or has something like our parents have had. So it's really taught us how to lament. That's one of the key issues. So I would recommend Vrogop's book, Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, from everything from can't get pregnant to miscarriage to I've got ailing parents to I lost my job. This doesn't seem how the world's supposed to be. I was supposed to be faithful to you. You're supposed to take care of me. This does not feel like that. So, Lord, how do I deal with it? And I trust you. I know you're good. But I just want you to know this is really hard, as if the Lord doesn't know. And the thing about that is you can be honest with the Lord, which is not sinful. Don't impute sin to him, but you can say, this is really hurt. This really hurts. This is really hard. And be honest. So we've swung back to the lament psalms multiple times.
They always end with, yet I will trust in your steadfast love.
Mm.
They always end with a yet or a but you are good. But they start with, how long, O Lord, or why? And it's been fun, even you this summer, studying about eternal state and our glorified bodies. And so, yeah, we're in the thick of caring for aging parents, and we see the deterioration of our parents, and we lament that. But I think Dan and I this summer have been trying to have the discipline of thinking of eternal realities in light of what we see here and all sorts of things. So we visit Windsor Castle and we think about a greater, state and a better king. And we have delicious food and we think of the marriage supper of the Lamb. We've just been trying to think about the eternal realities that are greater and better with both sad and the good blessings that we're experiencing. And so as we see our parents literally withering away in front of our eyes, it does point us to they're going to have a brand new body someday. And this suffering is short compared to all eternity. And so, yes, we grieve, but it's not without hope, and it's not forever. And I think the other reality is, as you see your parents' age, it's hard not to think, well, that could be me next. Very likely.
Very often I feel like that's me, and it's coming fast.
And am I preparing myself spiritually? And like we've also been telling ourselves, because we feel like right now we're in a sweet season of sabbatical, are we mending the sails?
Yeah.
For that time where our bodies start to deteriorate, just like we see our parents, and it becomes more and more real. When we were in our 20s, we couldn't even imagine, us getting to that point. But now that we're in our 50s, we're like, oh, that's probably next. And how am I going to do with my kids deciding what they're going to do with me? Am I getting ready right now?
Yeah.
And those are good meditations too. And beyond, even if my kids don't care for me how I want, there's a greater hope.
The other reality is pastors aren't exempt from that Romans 8:28-29 chain, that he works out all things for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose, so that we would be conformed to the image of his son. So you have to learn. My mom's got dementia. She repeats the same sins over and over and over. Mm-hmm. So do I. Mm-hmm. So do I. And the Lord is patient. The Lord is kind. All those things that we say, love is patient, love is kind, love is not self-seeking, love does not boast. The Lord's doing that with us. So we see that, and you think, oh, mercy. So you can look at, mom's going to be upset, or she's going to, here we go, you're going to go visit Tina and the cousins again. Roll your eyes. And you say, but the Lord's that patient with us. So you do learn more about how the Lord endures and what suffering, what you bear up under. And then the promise of the resurrection for her. I learned a long time ago, we had a lady who had mental issues. She used to sit right up front in church. And very often I'd get done preaching and I wasn't even done with amen. And she'd be like, Dan, I need to talk to you. And everybody's like, what's going on? It's just Jill. Don't worry about it. And she would be distressed. Something would be going on. And sometimes I made the mistake of giving her my phone number. She'd call me. And like after 45 minutes, I'd have to like, Jill, I just have to hang up. But I'd hang up and I'd say, one day, Jill is going to have a perfect mind. She won't be distressed. She won't be alone. She will have a perfect, I can't wait to meet that Jill. And I want to be patient like a parent's patient with their kids, with Jill. And I need to be patient with my mom. The problem is your parents can hurt our feelings more because we care way more about what they think. And we've had a different kind of relationship with it. It's easy for me with Jill. It's hard for me with my mom. But that's what I need to do. I need to say, this is not mom's final state. She's a believer. I have that hope. So God is teaching me patience, kindness, not self-seeking, not rude, not arrogant. Like all those things are being taught over and over and over again.
It's kind of like it's all part of God's good plan where, I don't know, the other day I saw a little child just throwing a big fit, just screaming in a restaurant. And I told my kids, someday that kid's going to be having to change that parent's diaper. Something like that. Meaning it all comes back around, right? And it's like maybe it's God's good plan for our growth. And maybe the thing that we see as so hard and such a burden, God in his sovereignty is saying, it's just the very thing that I'm doing to conform you to my image. So the thing that's felt so challenging and so sad and so dark, I know in God's good plan, he's using it even now to root out our sin and to make us more like himself.
I see. So again, you're probably the first through in this church. Mike's dad, Dan, had to go through with his mom. Watching this process go, it cultivates meekness in us as middle-aged men. Meekness in that the meek character is, I am willing to surrender very difficult situations to the goodness of the Lord. Meekness, Chuck Swindoll used to say it's power under control. Gentleness, meekness, power. And maybe that's helpful, but meekness is really a surrender to the Lord's goodness in really hard circumstances that are often through other people. So you don't get mad back. A meek person doesn't get mistreated and then fight back. A meek person says, the Lord's still in charge and he's still good. I don't need to get angry at him. So I watch the men and women in our church grow in meekness at situations that are beyond their control. And that's a thing to cultivate. I can cultivate meekness. The Lord is sovereign. The Lord's in charge. I can trust him. And so I can take the heat from my mom and cultivate that meekly. And then we come up with strategies to handle it. But I think that's good. One other thing that, for GraceLife London, I think of is many of the families here, it's their grandparents who are going through these kinds of things, not their parents. And hopefully out of the podcast, one thing I would say to you is if your parent is a carer, think about how you can be the emotional support for your parent. Think about how you can be the prayer support for your parent, or for anybody, your friend who's 10 years older than you who's going through this. Think about how you can be respite care. If they choose to live with the person, they never get a break. They're never off. So respite care can be a blessing. Just for us to know that somebody else is visiting my mom besides me is just a huge blessing. Like anybody who cares for my mom and loves my mom. It's like what we used to say with our kids in youth ministry. If you love my kid in youth ministry, you love me. I love you. That goes the other direction too. that can be a real help.
One of the biggest blessings was one of our kids who lives 4 hours away said, "We're going to go visit Granny." And they did it while we're here. And it was like, thank you, children.
It's one of the difficulties, especially as the dementia progresses, is feeling as though the visitation is beneficial. And one of the struggles I had particularly towards the end, was I would visit my mum, not so much with my dad. I'd feel like if my dad's berating me for 45 minutes, an hour, but I'm fighting through to the point where I can try to share something of the Lord with him and pray with him and encourage him before I go. I come away wrecked, but I feel like I've achieved something.
Yeah.
But with my mum towards the end, and there was just no recognition, and I would visit, and maybe she would just sleep the whole time, or she would just, if she was awake, she'd take no notice of me because she didn't recognize me and she couldn't understand me and she couldn't respond. And I think dealing with the effectiveness of our interventions, our care for people, was really a struggle for me. But I think one of the things I had to deal with to help me through that was just, well, this is now how I honor my pet. This is now how I honor my mum, is just holding her hand and singing to her. And if she's unaware of it, well, I'll try again next time, and if she benefits in some way that I can't tell, I'll be glad. But it was a very difficult thing to feel as though you're not actually accomplishing anything. I think that's again one of the struggles. That leads into another question, perhaps, which would be helpful for us to discuss, even if briefly. The question of why. I think my grip on the sovereignty of God, as someone who's utterly convinced of the sovereignty of God, gave me meant that I had no problem accepting this is the reality, this is what God has for us. I wasn't saying why me, I wasn't saying why us, I wasn't saying why my mum and dad. But I did struggle a little bit with why, Lord, are you keeping them alive now? They both know you. They're both not able to effectively witness to anyone. Why is this trial now continuing? I came to the conclusion it was for my sake as much as anything else, for me to learn to endure it, for me to seek opportunities to witness to the staff. I thought, well, I don't seem to have done my dad good this visit, or I don't seem to have been able to help my mum this visit, but just going and trying to love them and honor them is a testimony to the staff. Yeah, I did struggle with that question of why, though, for a good period of time, because it just seemed to me to be so much more beneficial to them and to everyone involved for the Lord to take them home. I think I got a bit of insight at the end. I really was so very grateful for this. Just when my dad was dying, having opportunity to spend time with and draw nearer to my sister and her husband, having opportunity to share my dad's testimony with multiple members of the staff, and then for some of them to come to his funeral. I got to preach the funeral, and for them to hit the gospel there. And I could see good coming out of it at that point, but I had to go through quite a long period of time where I just saw no good coming out of it. And the only good I could cling to is James 1. This is a trial. It is working steadfastness in me. So accept it, Tom, and accept it from the Lord's hand. But it wasn't. That was a struggle I had. I think another struggle I had just was with the emotional pain of seeing them suffer like that. I would come away from my visits just feeling utterly. I just feel like shouting or speeding or eating. I had to confess my own sin of gluttony to my fellow elders and ask them to keep me accountable, because I just wanted to eat chocolate all the way home. Comfort myself with chips and chocolate. But and I'm serious in that I had to confess my sin of gluttony, because it was a gluttonous response to the pain of it. I think that would be one question I would have for you. Where have you felt that this trial presents temptation to you? In James 1, we see that, okay, that this is the testing of our faith, isn't it? So, and James says, consider it pure gold, my brothers, when you encounter trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces, it works, steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. You know that God is working endurance and steadfastness in you through this trial. I took comfort there. But with trials, word in James is the same word translated temptations. It's this. With these trials, very often come a peculiar temptation to sin. James says that the temptations don't come from God. God is not tempting you to sin. But each one is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. Okay. So if I just play out my own temptation in that scenario, I was tempted repeatedly and failed sometimes and sinned sometimes in just comforting myself. The pain was a temptation to seek comfort in ways which I had sought comfort in years gone by. In this case, food, or just shouting in anger by myself in the car, not swearing, but just wanting to say, this hurts, rather than seeking comfort in lament, for instance. That's something I feel I didn't learn how to do well during this process. But a question for you: where have you felt the temptation? How have you dealt with that the temptations that have been peculiar to your situation?
I can think of a couple. You can add in any of your own. One was just justifying my reputation as a pastor for how I treat my mom. That was a temptation. And there are times where I felt like it wasn't fairly done, and so you want to tell somebody how terrible it's been, so that they can also join you and say, yeah, those people are horrible. I'm sure that was very helpful for the other people. And then between us, we've had to learn that we don't need to give the blow-by-blow of how it went with my mom, either when she goes to be with my mom or I go to be with my mom. I don't need to tell her how it was. Like, she said, how was it? And she wants me to share my heart, which is so unlike this Norwegian to do. But if I did, then I'd actually just bring her in, and she'd
relive it all.
Well, or relive it all, or she would get mad. Like, how dare she treat you like that, or that's really hard. And so we just have learned to say, yeah, it's pretty normal.
And I'll say, how was it? And he'll say, the same. And I've had to have self-control and not ask what did she say this time? We had the temptation to kind of make it worse by kind of complaining, just the two of us, about how bad it was, and we realized it's not doing our hearts any good if we rehearse how much of
offenses.
a beating he got this time.
Yeah.
And so I when he says it's the same, I know what that means, because it affects how we want to love her, and we want to be thinking negative thoughts about her, and so controlling how we talk about her at home, not in a negative way, but and how Christ would want us to talk about her. Yeah, so we had to confess that temptation.
I think one of the things that's been helpful to fight those temptations is to remember it's hard on us. Imagine being her. Matt, you used to have a mind that would do things. She used to travel. She used to entertain. She used to have hospitality. She loved on lots of the college kids in our church well into her 70s. She had an active and vital ministry. Like, imagine how it is for her in a prison. During COVID was the worst because they wouldn't let us in and they wouldn't let her out. And so we would just remember it's worse for her. Whatever she's feeling, that's terrible. So that would actually give us compassion to be able to absorb. Okay, so she's mad at me. Well, of course she's mad. I mean, this is terrible for her. What else is she going to do? So being more her focused and being more compassionate for her really helped with those temptations.
I've had to really work on doing what I do for her as unto the Lord, and not kind of like, oh, phew, I don't feel guilty anymore, I visited her. So
we do, unfortunately, one of our sinful temptations is to assuage our guilt. Yeah. We're trying to, okay, I did this. At least I don't need to feel guilty.
What we tell each other, we go visit her, we play games with her, and then we tell each other, we just did what the world does. Non-Christians do a better job than what we're doing.
Some non-Christians show up more often than I do.
So just asking the Lord, please help us love this sweet, helpless woman as unto you with the right heart, because my heart's wicked. I didn't get a chance to foster a lot of natural affection towards my mother-in-law like I did for my own parents. Even the natural affection that I hear you have for your parents. Unfortunately, I had a really strained relationship with this. I had a typical bad relationship with the woman we've been talking about the whole time.
Right.
And so I find myself not visiting her out of love for Christ, but just now I feel better, which is not what God wants. So we're a mess. Those are the temptations.
Well, and I guess that was my follow-up question was how do you deal with those temptations? How have you, and the flip side of it, that we talked about the trials, we've talked about the temptations, but flip side of it is what sort of blessings have you found? What are the lessons that you felt that you are being taught? How is God growing you through this? Are there silver linings to this cloud? Are there blessings that you can point to where you could say, you know what, I think God is doing something wonderful here despite the horror of it all?
I don't remember where we got the phrase. One of the books that we got the phrase in, it might have been When People Are Big and God Is Small, an Ed Welch book. There was a line toward the end of the book is we need to have thicker skin and softer hearts. And thicker skin meaning we need to not let things bother us. But you can fight against it just by hardening yourself and shutting yourself off emotionally. That's why Welch's phrase is really helpful. Thicker skins, but softer heart. And both of us have innate people-pleasing temptations. So it really has helped us just say, how do we love my mom? I need to love my mom. I can love her like I can love anybody in the congregation. We can love each other. So since my particular temptation might be people-pleasing, if my mother was upset, that's the worst in the world. because I'm not pleasing her. So learning how to say, I need to love her and I need to have a soft heart toward her. That's one of the.
That's good. I think for me, one of the big blessings that came out of it was realizing that it's okay for me to be hurt. That it's actually me hurting. It's not about me. So I'm going to visit my dad, or I'm going to visit my mom, both of them in these cases, obviously. But going with that attitude and saying it's okay for me to be hurt. It's all right for me to find this very, very painful. The Lord was willing to put himself through unimaginable pain for my sake. Can I not willingly subject myself to this pain for their sake? And then also, I'd say another blessing that came out of it that was huge was incidental, I suppose, but we would always seek to read scripture and we would always seek to sing hymns. When I visited on my own, I'd always sing to them. If I visited with Donna, it sounded a lot better. But through the whole thing, one of the spin-off blessings was just the blessing to my soul of those readings and those prayers. And those, the times of prayer, but also the songs, the lyrics of the songs that I played on repeat to my dad during the sort of 3 days of his prolonged death, were just stuck in my mind and blessing my soul for months afterwards. So it is interesting, isn't it? How the proverb that says that, the one who waters will himself be watered is just so true. You go saying, okay, I'm going to do this for them, but you come away blessed by even the content of what you're giving them.
Good.
Okay, maybe we should draw this to a close, but I think let me just have a quick look at my questions in case there's something else here that would just top and tail it. And maybe you want to have a think in case there's just another area.
I had a couple of thoughts about getting catching up when it catches up to you. One of the things that turned out to be very important was durable power. We call it durable power of attorney. So you had mentioned that before. There's a handful of things any parent should get ready for their kids. One is, how's the money going to be cared for, and how is the health going to be cared for? So getting those things ironed out, we're probably at an age as we go back, like we should probably make sure all those are ironed out. We have some things in statement form, but we should organize that. That's a gift for kids as they come up so that they have some tracks to run on. Then take the process slow and get input from professionals in the area. As soon as you become power of attorney financially, you also become liable for the money. So you need to know what you're doing with money and what the state, in your case, the government, requires. So there's some things to learn about that. And I didn't share this part about it, but we have to move my mom out of her house into assisted living, and she went virtually kicking and screaming to there. And they called elder care services on me. Somebody did. And I got turned in for abusing my mother. Well, I had a whole host of documented resources available, and I just turned them all in, and it took a month or so to get it sorted out. But they said, oh, well, you have all the receipts, you have all the doctor's visits, you have all those things. They have to do it. That if they get a report, they have to follow it up like it's a legitimate thing. So just take your notes, keep things in order is really important for their best and your best. That was a practical thing. That was really painful.
Yeah.
I'm caring for my mom, and she turns me in. So, it's almost.
She turned you in.
We're not sure who did it because I can't say, but we're assuming she did.
Yeah. So this is one big question that we've not covered, and we really have to before we close, because I think the hardest question for us as Christians who are under the commandment, honor your father and your mother, is how do you go about honoring your father and mother when your father and mother turn back into children? When you begin to change the role and become the parent. You're not the parent. They're still your father and mother. I played out the difficulty that I found with having to endure 45 minutes, an hour's admonition, telling off, I don't know what you call it in American English, but verbal slapping from my dad, and seeking a way to honor him in that. For me, I found it very, very difficult. It pushed all the buttons from my childhood that would make me want to rebel, run away, turn away from that situation. But here I am, and I have to honor my father. How do I honor my father now in this situation? But a much more commonplace conundrum, I suppose, is just you're dealing with your parents' wishes and demands and insistence. They're your parents. They are telling you what they want. And you now are in the position as the adult in the room because their mind has become childish. And you have to make a decision on their behalf. And yet they're still aware enough to call the obedience card upon you and to accuse you of not honoring them. So how have you had to navigate that? Maybe if you want to give some examples perhaps, and how have you dealt with that tension of I want to honor them, but I don't have to obey them in this situation?
I think the decision-making process to honor, first, my mom is made in the image of God, so she deserves dignity. So I always want to give her dignity as well as I can. And that I think we all want to think, I want to give my parent dignity. When I have to be the adult in the room, I did find it really helpful to get wisdom. So love demands that we do what's best, regardless if it costs us. So they may get mad, but I need to do what's best. That's what a parent does with a toddler. The toddler throws a tantrum, but the parent still does what's best. Mm-hmm. They just need to do it in a God-honoring way, God-pleasing way. So it was really helpful to get wisdom. So how do I handle this? And there's wisdom that comes through the medical community. There's wisdom that comes through people who've walked through this before. There's wisdom in writing. So we would get wisdom so that we could arrive at the decisions. She had a harder time, I think, accepting some of the decisions because my mom didn't always present like she was as bad as we had to treat her. Mm-hmm. So, I could get to the point where I sought wisdom. I know what's best. And it's never just been my own decision. I had siblings involved. So I could say we landed on this decision. And I was okay with that. And but getting wisdom was really helpful.
Can I just jump in there? Because I think that's one of the things that we found hardest. I'm talking Donna and I, but also for my sister. Just the reality that when you're dealing with dementia, the presentation can be at times, in the earlier stages, it can be at times very respectable. And then the realities of the underlying dementia show through. And it was so hard for us to deal with that precisely the situation you've dealt with. We would find ourselves taking great comfort, strangely, and this is maybe another area of guilt, when my dad, for instance, would berate me for 45 minutes, and it would all be seemingly logical, seemingly coherent admonition, and he's telling me I need to take care of him and I should be taking him home, and then at the end of it he'd start talking about the fact that he'd invented a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and he was going to go for a trip to Paris with mum, and then you suddenly realize, okay, yes, he's here for a reason. Oh, phew, okay, but it's very, very difficult to deal with. Sometimes people from other parts of their lives would come and visit. They could present very normally for a short period of time. Those insights into the degree of underlying dementia that cause the problems that you and the family become aware of can be more rare, and yet they represent a very real underbelly of decline that isn't necessarily apparent to everyone at a surface level. I think that's probably going to be quite comforting to someone watching this podcast who will be dealing with that really painful struggle.
And
That was the surprise pain, especially for my dear husband, is he was dealing with needing to put his mom into a home, and she was very angry at him. And because it happened in a community, in a church community, because she had joined our church community, people were questioning his decision because they would say, she presents fine to me.
Yeah.
And we found that painful, but the thing that God was rooting out of us was people pleasing. Are we going to please the Lord, and are we going to love this sweet lady as unto the Lord, and leave the results to the Lord, and try to remember. I had to say, when I'd be like so hurt by people questioning our decision in our church family, I would have to say, how many times have I, at least in my heart, judged somebody for a decision I see them making in the church when I don't know the whole story? And so when we experienced the other end of that, where people judged us not understanding the whole story, I tried to say, okay, you've done the same thing. Next time, just remember you don't know the whole story when people are making difficult decisions in the body of Christ, but you go through things as a family, as a church family. So as far as the thing that God wanted to teach us and continues to want us to teach us is, do it all as unto him, not for results, not for anything else, but the fact that he sees, and as imperfect as our efforts are, we're doing it for the well done, good and faithful servant, even though we don't feel very well done and very faithful. It's hard, but we know that he sees, and he's helping us along the way.
yeah, and just because it was the first time for us to go through it doesn't mean there weren't wonderful resources available. So it's so common. There are so many people who have dealt as carers for people with dementia. That was usually a great relief, because they would understand. They would say, this is very normal. Here's a new behavior. Oh yeah, that's coming.
It would be so comforting. There are, though, I would say, I point out the people that didn't understand, but then the Lord would bring somebody else who had gone through the same kind of suffering. And they would say, oh, yeah, we understand. And that was such a comfort, too. And so here we are, we go through things so that we can comfort others with the comfort we've received. So at the same time, we've been blessed with an elder board that we let in to all the things that we were struggling with. And they've been very kind and compassionate and supportive all along the way. And in the end, we're really not the ones who are suffering. Dan's mom is the one.
Yeah, she's really the one that's suffering.
She's really the one who's suffering.
Yeah.
Well, it's been good to talk it through with you guys. I hope it's been a blessing to others as they get to listen in. I'm sure it will be to some. I'm sure there's massive questions that come out of it. In terms of resources that have been a blessing to you, Or maybe passages of the Bible that you've turned to again and again to comfort yourself. What would be your top few that come to mind?
Well, the one that you read this morning, I know that this is a time difference when this is going to go well, but when did we give you a drink of water? When did we eat you?
Matthew 25.
Yeah, Matthew 25.
Yeah, I opened that up as you were saying, I went, but it didn't seem like I was doing anything. Like, why did I bother? But the Lord's counting it. Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? I mean, he says, and the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, it happens to be your mother and father, you did it to me. So that's a huge comfort, that we're just loving somebody unto the Lord. Who knows what we're going to get in return until glory.
And if we did anything, the Lord gave us the strength to do it anyhow, and so he gets all the glory. So, and I think Philippians 2, if I have a Savior who was willing to go so far down, humble himself to become a servant and humble himself all the way to death, he's my example. He's our example of how to love somebody in a difficult situation. And the hope of heaven is also what keeps us enduring. Our resurrection and our resurrection. So what we're going through is very temporary.
The resurrection and the new heavens and the new earth are incredibly encouraging for and you live in a church community where you'll watch this happen at various stages for various people, and you can say, one day that will not be there.
Yeah, I think the doctrine of the resurrection, the doctrine of the new body, became especially precious to me, and I think has comforted me repeatedly. Donna and I can't count the number of times we've come away from visiting my parents saying, it's not going to be like that. That is not how we will remember them. And, there's the classic thing after someone dies, do you go see the body or not? And actually, I found it really helpful to be there when my dad passed away, to be able to say he's gone and just have that closure. But that's, someone else may not find it helpful. I had no problem with my dad at that point when I looked at his now vacant body. I had no problem saying he's gone. He's home. He's in heaven. Why? I've been continually fixing my eyes on that day when he was going to at last be set free from this decaying, failing body. The same for my mom. I didn't sadly get to be there when she passed, but it's such a hope to say, I can see this downward, irreversibly unstoppable trend of decline, but that's not the end. That's so good, isn't it? And so many times we'd come away comforting ourselves with the reality that Mum's sharp mind was going to be restored one day, and my dad's eyesight back, his keen artistic ability restored and renewed and glorified. And what will it be like? I think when it comes to fixing our minds on things above and not on earthly things, this is the what we see, but that hope for the future is what we have to fix our minds on. I think for me that was I don't know if that was a struggle so much as something I had to consciously do repeatedly. I didn't find it, whenever we did that, I didn't find it difficult, and it was comforting, but the next round I just had to do it all over again. So I think in terms of resources for me it was that. I think from understanding dementia point of view, I'd had some medical training, so I was not surprised by the decline. I think if I was advising someone who was going into this without a decent enough understanding of the process of dementia, I would say you've got to get educated about what to expect with dementia, because I think even with that medical knowledge, I was taken aback sometimes by just how childlike my parents' brains had become. And it came out in different ways at different times. After my dad died, one of the carers thought she was doing us a favor. She brought out a clay model, plasticine. I don't know if you have plasticine in the States, but it's kind of thing you give children to do modeling with, Play-Doh type thing, but different color, moldable materials. So she brought out this elephant that he had made. She thought she was doing us a great favor. My father was a sculptor, woodcarver, and she brought out this elephant that he had made. She said, "Oh, I had a class with them the other day, and I was going to do modeling, and your dad took over the class, and he taught us all how to make elephants." And she was so excited because she thought she was doing us a favor, telling us what a lovely time they'd had. Both my sister and I were looking at this and nearly brought to tears, because it was a 5-year-old elephant. And my dad was a very skilled sculptor, But there was this baby-like elephant. And that's what had happened inside his head. But his verbal capacity a few days earlier was sufficient for him to be talking like an adult, but inside becoming like a child. If you don't understand that process, you need to get educated in that. I think another resource my wife found very helpful, despite having a background in care and caring for people with dementia, was a book by Anne Benton. As an evangelical pastor in this country, John Benton, Anne Benton's his wife, and she wrote a book called If It's Not Too Much Trouble. So maybe we should get that to you guys as you go on with your struggle. That was a very great help to her, with some, very helpful, if painful, examples given throughout.
There are some helpful things, CCEF, and I'm trying to remember the other. There's 3 people who publish little pamphlets for all kinds of issues, and I think each of them has something on a loved one has dementia. So in the biblical counseling world, they have some ways to process it.
Maybe we can get some links
Yeah,
for
we
that
get some
in the
links to those.
podcast.
Yeah.
They're called something like Help My Parent has
Alzheimer's, yeah. They're in the
That'd
help
be
series.
good, yeah.
One of Brian's Sayers, I'm Being Manipulated. It's in that series. There's one in that one, and there's one in the CCEF series.
There's a longer book called The 24-Hour Day that I thumbed through. I didn't read it all. I guess
It's a
big.
Yeah, it's a.
If you don't have time, it's a
Short
In
version.
terms of biblical study, you mentioned Matthew 25. We talked about the resurrection. We talked about fixing our eyes on heaven. You talked about Philippians 2. Also, a theology of lament was something you mentioned.
Yeah, dark clouds, deep mercy.
Theology of suffering and the sovereignty of God. If you don't have your head around that, if you don't have a solid grasp on why did God allow Job to suffer? You got to read Job. You got to get your head around the sovereignty of God in suffering. I think that going into this, that was solid for me. But if that's a question you really need to grapple with, I'd say you've got to do some study in the sovereignty of God over suffering. I think also the biggest tool that I got most help from was a hymn book. I put a hymn book on top of the cupboard in my parents' room, only because whatever you leave in the room of someone with dementia disappears.
Yes.
It will walk.
Yeah.
Bibles walk. letters walk, pictures walk, and strange people's clothing turns up, and items of
Yes, it
clothing
does.
disappear. And
I don't know whose glasses my mother is wearing when I pick her up.
my unbearable image in my head is of my dad having been dressed in one of my mum's cardigans. It was really painful to watch. Yes, parents wearing other people's shoes and clothing is sad, but hide a hymn book somewhere, and I hid it on top of the cupboard, and a Bible up there, and every time I would visit, I'd pull it down and I'd just sing. There's a theology of suffering written into the old hymns,
Yes.
which so many of our more modern hymns have been missing. It's coming back, thank God. I think I love some of the Sovereign Grace stuff that's coming out now, and you could probably name a few other of those groups. So, but there's some really good modern music bringing back a good theology of suffering. But our forefathers went through it, and it's all there in the hymnody. So
it is.
good.
Indelible Grace did a live album and another album, a lot of laments in those, and they just pulled back Watson Cooper and a variety of things that were really helpful. It's really true. Yeah, it's really true. And our parents love that. Your music part of your brain is a different part of your brain than another part of your brain. So sometimes that's a real blessing for them to get to their other side of their brains. The emotional part is the last part to go, and that's where the music is. So
for both my parents, that was the last part to go. So for my mum, it was not till about 6 months or 8 months or so before she died that but we up to that point we could sing to her, with her, and she would hum along. She'd harmonize. It was very remarkable to see her come alive a bit. She was already, the communication ability had dropped, her recognition of us had gone, but singing hymns would bring out that part of her which was still there. So really precious.
Before we wrap up, we probably should. They probably like to go home today. Maybe fourth person. What do you call it?
Fourth wall.
The camera. All those people behind that camera.
The millions that are watching.
Yeah. The tens that are maybe ever going to watch this. Just maybe to say this, as if it's early, Mr. Editor. We're going to be talking through. First of all, I want to say thank you for having us do this. Hopefully it's a help for people to get ready at GraceLife London for these kinds of things, to be compassionate, caring people for friends and unbelievers in this. What we're going to be doing, as we go through this, you're going to hear us lament a lot. Much of our processing today will be lamenting the different things. And so when we wrap up and we talk about some of the resources, that will be a key part, is learning how to lament.
All right. Well,
splice as you wish.
Splice as you wish.
Or don't even use it.
Dan, Linda, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It has been a bit of a lament. It is interesting talking these things through and just seeing how raw it is still, but how good God has been. One of the things which I keep coming back to again and again, just in conclusion to it all, people ask me, how are you doing? And I'm like, well, God is good. And that's not just a saying. It's not just a saying. Through it all, at every step on the way, I didn't feel that in the same way. But I can look back and say, at every step of the way, God was good and God is good. And we can trust him. It is so good to be able to trust him and to know that we can trust him for our parents too. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your insight and contribution. God bless you in your own ongoing struggle with this.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
For sharing. It was really comforting to hear some of the things you said. It comforted us.
Yeah.